Brilliant. Awesome. Dude,
Yeah.
man. I'm in awe. It's awesome. I've got to say, one of the things that I love about you is I've watched a lot of people go on similar trajectories and similar journeys to me. And I have to say that it might be that you were just a bit wiser about how you went about doing that publicly. But it feels like you missed a lot of the pitfalls that I at least fell into, and I see a lot of other people falling into. And when I'm going on, when I'm trying to help people go on their journey, I can see people falling into the same traps I went into of, you know, when we shift in our beliefs, the dualisms that are involved, where we just basically flip the coin, and we're exactly the same coin. We're just, you know, wailing on the other side now. I've got to say, I don't know if I just missed that season in you or if that was part of your journey, but it's something I see you demonstrate really, really well again and again and again. Your social media posts constantly kind of exposing the mimetic principles that are at play, the scapegoating, you know, the hey, can you see that by you reacting to that side, you're actually the same as that side? You're actually transcending this. I don't know, is that something that is fair? Do you think that's something that you naturally kind of like gravitated towards, that kind of position, or is that something you had to work in yourself?
Well, it was definitely something I had to work through. You know, I mean, I think having been a pastor for many years, one thing I learned is just not to share everything. And, you know, that there's plenty of things that I want to say a lot of times, but I know that wisdom does say, tamp your attitude down sometimes and just try to distill the wisdom, and maybe sometimes keep the emotion out of it, because 2 years from now, you might regret that. It's kind of like in an argument with your spouse or whatever. It's like, well, tamp down the emotion, you know, and don't make any, you know, don't act just on pure emotion, because you may regret that later on. So that's one thing I've always tried to do with anything I've put out publicly, is to stop. And I oftentimes make posts and then delete them, and then reword them and delete them and reword them and delete them, just because I know the spirit and the attitude behind it might not be exactly what I'm trying to convey, you know. And then, you know, for me also, it really was every stage of the journey, you always feel like you're more enlightened than you were in the former stage, right? So you always do. It's I don't really think you can help that until you're like an old wise sage. I don't really think you can help but look at a former iteration of yourself and think it less enlightened than the present one, and therefore anyone who matches or looks like that older version of yourself is also less enlightened. I don't think we can really not do that, but we can certainly learn by experience to stop. And when we're tempted to think that way and act that way and talk that way, stop and remember who we were in that moment, and remember how sincere we were, and also how necessary that leg of the journey was to where we are right now. And that without it, you know, all the different versions of myself, even Hellfire and Brimstone Jeff, which is a Jeff I don't think you ever had the privilege of meeting, because I was very much, I think we connected because we were both on the grace wavelength. But there is a Hellfire and Brimstone version of Jeff somewhere way back there, and I still have some of the CDs and maybe even a cassette or two of my preachings from those days, and maybe I'll release them to the Patreon.
Dude, that could be like,
exactly.
That's like limited release, you know.
Exactly. Yep. I have some. I've often said I've preached sermons on hell that would make sinners in the hands of an angry God look like a Mother's Day message from Joel Osteen. So, but like even that version of myself, when I look back at it, I'm like, there's absolutely no way that I would be here right now had it not been for that. That brought me here. It's all part of the journey. It's the transcend and include thing. And that's just one thing I've had to learn over the years, is to just not be judgmental of people, because they're exactly where I was. I was there, and I was totally sincere when I was in that place. You know, I was not I wasn't the caricature of the Hellfire and Brimstone guy. I really believed this stuff, you know, and I didn't just get up in the pulpit and preach Hellfire and Brimstone because I wanted to control people or keep the pews dented and the offering bags filled. I did it because I really believed people were going to a Christless, sulfuric eternity. And I wept over that, and I wanted to save them from it, you know? And so I think a lot of the people that we are often tempted to belittle and berate, we have to stop ourselves and remember our own sincerity so that we can then project that onto them as well and give them that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's that concept of everyone is their own hero, right? Like no one, even Hitler, thinks he's doing the right thing. Whatever that twisted story is that has created that narrative, he still looks at his life and goes, I'm the hero in this story. I'm the main character in the cast and everyone's vying for me. The amount of delusion involved there to realize, well, maybe not everyone is vying for you, mate. Maybe some. But like, it is really hard to do that, isn't it? Because I know for me in my journey, I can look at different stages. I was the hellfire brimstone. I was running around giving out tracts and, preaching the gospel, quote unquote, and, whatever that meant for me at the time. And like you said, I really didn't want people to be lost. I really wanted people to know the great thing that I had, which really was great for me in the season I was in. It really was good. It was helpful. And like you're saying as well, I wouldn't be here without that. I wouldn't be here without the stepping stones I've got. I might be somewhere better. I don't know, but I actually like where I am in many ways. And I like where I'm going. Hopefully, I think that's a good trajectory. But it is hard when I think there's something in us. I don't know if you've observed this in your interactions with different people, but or even maybe your interaction with yourself. But there's something in us that can't help when we kind of do move on to demonize where we've been. What do you think that is? Do you think that's do you think that's more about us, or do you think it's about the systems? Like, do you have thoughts on that?
I can only really speak for myself and then of course things I've observed in other people, but I think it's really it's a way for us to we desperately want to separate from that person. We're embarrassed of that person. We don't want to be associated with that. And so demonizing that person, even as it's present in others, is a way for us to kind of unconsciously separate ourselves from a version of ourselves we would rather pretend never existed. You know what I mean? And I think most people who are doing that, and that includes me, they're warring against themselves, and they're warring against that a season of life that maybe we haven't yet come to understand as being sacred and as being a part of our journey and as being a part of this larger whole. And we're just kind of fractured. A journey should be like a progression, and everything's included and it's all one whole thing. But sometimes we just break it up, and we have like this version of us and this version of us and this version of us, and we're depleted and we're spread all over the place. And wherever we are right now, because we're not including all those former versions of ourselves, we're weaker than we would otherwise be, And I think the gospel really helps us to include all of that. Like the woman at the well, Jesus tells her everything she ever did and brings her, I think, into a state of like completion and wholeness. Whereas before she's shattered and she's scattered. Yeah, exactly. But Jesus is like, and when you run, if you, let's say you take like a, I don't know, like a match or a sparkler, and you spin it around wildly, you create the illusion of this like tail, right? But if you stop spinning it, everything comes and it's just this one thing. And I think when we're always running from that past version of ourselves, we create this illusion of being stretched out and therefore depleted. And so we always feel that depletion. But if we stop, everything comes into oneness, and we can see it all as belonging. And I think once we have that experience in our own lives, we're able to extend that grace to others and see it there. But until we deal with ourselves, and until we deal with our own self-rejection and self-hatred, not sure we will ever be able to genuinely duplicate that in our relationships with others. We can pretend, but whether or not it's genuine, I guess is debatable. For me, like I said, I was a pastor for many years. I worked with youth for a lot of those years. And when I think back on some of the things that I spoke, some of the things that I preached, some of the things that I did, one, I would have beat the youth pastor up if it was my kid under my care being taught the things that but whatever, I once preached a hellfire and brimstone sermon where, you ever seen Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames, the old like 1980s cheesy play where, okay.
I already want to though.
Oh yeah.
In the context of it coming up, I'm like, this sounds great.
It's a fantastic piece of evangelical history. But there'd be these garish sets of like I don't know. I don't even know where they get the stuff from, but heaven is basically constructed out of gold and aluminum foil. And I don't know. It's just, it gives you these people's lives scenarios, and some of them accept Christ, some don't. And at the end, they all die, and then one goes to heaven and one goes to hell. And anyways, I did a version of that, but it was a sermon where it was called Sermons from Hell, where basically I preached and laid out the idea of hell. And then we brought back essentially people who are in hell to preach to others who are in the same place that they're in. And I mean, they had like blood on their face. We went over the top with it because I was young and sick in the head,
dude,
I guess.
If you're gonna do it right.
Do it right. Yeah. I mean, we had worms coming out of kids' faces, and it was disgusting. But I had kids for months, perhaps years after that, who had nightmares of this.
I bet.
And I'm, sometimes I would just look back on that and just weep and feel so guilty. And just even things like preaching holiness in such a way that kids were just deprived of simple things like going to their senior prom because it's sinful, and just kind of presenting the gospel in such a way that you just kept people from living. And I just remember one time I was praying and I was really broken about it because I had been so transformed by grace that I just couldn't imagine ever doing that or being that way. And I really had this sense of the Spirit within me just shushing me as I'm like apologizing, and being like, I'm so sorry I was ever this way. And I really just had this sense of this inner, like, just hush, And then I just had this sense of God saying, thank you for always giving everything you have to what you believe to be true. And it was like, yes, you were wrong. You were very, very wrong. And yes, there's going to have some of the people that you ministered to are going to need help as a result of the things that you said to them. And when you can make amends and make it right with them personally, do it. But you're not always going to be able to do that. And in some way, you have to forgive yourself and you have to move on. And the way that really hit home to me was just hearing that sense of God, and this is an inward experience. Of course, it's all anecdotal, but just the sense of God saying, thank you. Like, I can separate your actions from the heart that they sprang from. And that was an encounter that was really, really, really pivotal for me and really helped me, I think, even understand and relate to other people as they're on their own journeys and, to maybe not be quite so judgmental.
Yeah. It's the sort of thing that something like that makes me think, when I look through like the Pauline epistles or something like that, I'm like, man, I wish that he had written someone at some point and just said, dude, I used to murder Christians and that has fucked me up. Because it must have, right? I mean, you cannot imagine what Paul, right? That's how bad we feel maybe preaching a really harrowing hell sermon. And, some people are walking around with some religious trauma because of that. But we didn't kill anyone. I don't know. I'm speaking for myself. Right. I don't know. But I'm assuming, that wasn't part of your ministry. But, you think of something like that and you think, man, if Paul could kind of integrate that and manage to move forward and become all that he became, or whichever, there's a lot of, when you look through history of people that became great, a lot of them have some pretty messed up backstory, right? I mean, that, in fact, that sometimes is what makes people so great, right? We don't like that dynamic of it, but actually sometimes it's the real messed up backstory, it's the abuse, it's the trauma, it's the whatever, it's the violence, it's getting sent to prison and, realizing that you shouldn't have killed people or you were very racist or whatever, and then you come out and you're totally transformed. Like, that's often kind of part and parcel of the journey. But you do, I struggled with that for a long time. And I know a lot of people come to me and they go, I've wasted all these years. I've lost, I was a pastor for 25 years and I've been teaching people the wrong thing. And they really struggle to grasp, but you wouldn't have got here otherwise, And I think, maybe part of that is on my personal level, you wouldn't have got here otherwise, Jeff, if you hadn't been preaching those messages or whatever. But there is the element of like, but have I set someone else on the trajectory that they didn't need to go, where they've got to go 25 years before they actually get into the right thing? That's a real tough thing this concept of transcending and including is really tough to grasp.
It is.
I know you're using that kind of language, Wilbur, Rohr, Jungian kind of language. I don't know if that is kind of stuff you're familiar with, but how did you get to the place where you started to see life a little bit more as a journey, to hold the stages that you're at and have been at a little looser? Like, what's been your journey from being that fire and brimstone pastor? I never even knew that, but you came into grace, and you've gone beyond that into something different and new now, the kind of stuff we're talking about now. Like, how did you navigate that? Was that a painful process? Was that exciting for you? Like, maybe a little of everything?
Yeah. It was pure hell a lot of times, you know. I mean, it really was. You know, like I said, I was never fake with what I did. And I don't say that to toot my own horn. It's just not the way that I'm wired, you know? So, as a young man, I was 14, 15 years old. My family traveled down to Pensacola, Florida, to the Brownsville revival. I don't know if you're familiar with that and the kind of renewal movements of the 90s. And
that's Rodney Howard-Browne one, right? Is that Pensacola?
That was in Lakeland.
Okay, no,
this was Brownsville was like John Kilpatrick, Steve Hill.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So we traveled down there in the mid 90s. I grew up in an Assemblies of God home, and this was an Assemblies of God church. We only lived an hour from. We still only live an hour from Toronto, but we never went to Toronto because it wasn't Assemblies of God enough for us.
Okay.
But Brownsville was Assemblies of God enough for us. Yeah. So we went down there, and I had a really kind of radical transformation. And you know, call it the crowd, call it what you will, but very impacted by what I experienced there. And my life really took a turn. And I mean, I began to, I prayed 4, 6, 8, sometimes 12 hours a day during that period of time. Wow. And I don't just mean for like a couple weeks. I mean, years, my high school years. I mean, we had a pool table in our basement, and I would just pace around the pool table all night praying, because I have to move when I pray. And I mean, literally to the point where I wore grooves in the carpet around the table, and you can still see it to this day. I mean, I became very, very obsessed with and by this whole thing. And I went after it with sincerity. I went after it with purity of heart, I think. But dude, it was killing me, you know. And there was always this, I'm a kid, you know, at the time. So there's always these two parts of your life. You know, you're doing this, and then you go to school, and you know, I can't exactly do this all the time. So I'm always struggling with these two parts of myself. And but about 17, 18, I really plugged in and got serious with it, and decided I was going to go into the ministry and whatever. My wife and I, we get engaged right out of high school. I get married when I'm 2 weeks 19, and 2 weeks later we moved to Florida to join up with the ministry school in Pensacola and Brownsville. And I'm as radical as they come in those days. I mean, I eat, drink, breathe, sleep, revival, holiness, prayer, you know, fasting, you know, you name it. You know, David Hogan was my favorite person on this planet. I listened to like thousands of hours of his screamings and demon stories and everything else. And I mean, I just was absolutely obsessed with this. And while at Brownsville, I started to have dreams where different preachers whom I respected would just come in my dreams and preach grace to me. Wow. Things I never heard, or if I did, I didn't remember hearing them. Sure. And these preachers would have never actually said these things. This was not their message at all, but I respected them. And so it kind of, what they were saying, I think it kind of bypassed, because I respected that individual. And so I think that's maybe one of the
packaging you could accept, really. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it was smuggled in Trojan horse style. And I was hearing and receiving this stuff. And I mean, I'd be weeping in the dreams because I was so burdened down with works and all this stuff. And I'd wake up, and for a second I'd feel like, well, that was real. And then I'd go into binding and loosing and rebuking the devil, thinking the devil was trying to get in to deceive me, you know, literally putting frankincense and myrrh anointing oil over my headboard to keep this stuff out. That's the that's the Pentecostal dream. Yeah. It's the Pentecostal dream catcher. So, you know, but something was happening in me too, you know, like my heart was being softened. And I remember Mike Bickle came to Brownsville, and now when I look at Mike Bickle, he seems like a hellfire and brimstone type. But at the time, he was Mr. Softy compared to what I was used to, because he's preaching Song of Solomon, the love of God, and things like this. Yeah. And those are just ideas I'd never entertained. And he comes in, I remember he's preaching on how when some of us stand before God for judgment, we think it's only going to be the bad that God brings forth and shows us. He was like, but what if as his bride, God brings forth the beauty from within you? And that's how he judges you. I had never even considered that in my early 20s. I was like, what, 21 at the time or 20 at the time. No one had ever said anything like that to me. Judgment was only hellfire and brimstone. And I remember hearing that, and it just woke something up in me and shook me to my core. And I held on to it for a couple of days. And then after a couple of days, I consciously renounced it and let it go and was like, no, this is not who you are. This is not the nature of God. And from that point on, I was kind of like plunged into this really dark season of hardcore fundamentalism, just straining and stressing myself out. I mean, practically almost destroyed my marriage because of it and how intense I was and the pressure that I put on my wife and everything else. And then
was she as intense as you? Where was she at in this process?
She was supportive of me, but she was never quite like me. You know what I'm saying? So she was a good wife, and she was supportive and believed in me. She believed in me, but she doesn't have the same disposition. And so of course that would sometimes cause, some tension, but, of course. At the time I was totally blind to it. At the time I was just so caught up in doing my own thing. I didn't even really notice that was happening. I'm just assumed we're on the same page. You're on board. Okay, let's do this. That's one of those versions of Jeff I've really had to learn to forgive and include, because he's one I'm not exactly all that fond of because he hurt people that I love. Right. Yeah. So, but it took me really crashing. It really took me crashing. It took me really, I always imagine the scene from The Truman Show where he's just sailing into what looks like open skies, and then suddenly he crashes into it. And it really took something like that for me, where I really thought, I'm doing it. And then, oh my God, I'm not doing it, And it took me really having to come face to face with what this was doing to my marriage, to my family, even to people I'm ministering to that I thought I was helping. It really took me just hitting a wall and seeing that so much of this just doesn't work. It works if it's you alone in this hermetically sealed environment and you never have to be touched by the outside world. I mean, it works there, but it doesn't work out here.
You think there's a part of personality in that as well? Like, because I'm a bit like you, I think, from just hearing about your story. I'm like very driven. I'm a workaholic. I have my own story of how much I've hurt people by throwing myself 100% into one thing and failing to realize that actually I'm not one thing. I'm kind of like this mixture of Phils that has a family and people he loves. And there are people that are built very differently from us. In fact, most people, it seems, are built very differently than us.
Yeah.
And do you think that's maybe part of it as well, that it takes quite a lot for someone that's very intense and single-minded to hit that crashing point where other people probably hit it much quicker? Realize, I'm not able to walk around a pool table for 12 hours a day. Most 17-year-olds are going to realize that really quickly, right? When you're working with youth, I bet most of your youth weren't having that problem. My parents need to get new carpets every couple of years.
We didn't have very few cases of that. So, or we had very few cases of that, rather.
So I'm just intrigued as to like how much of that beginning aspect is so interwoven into your very personality, your makeup, that driven side of you. It's fascinating. Anyway, on you go, please. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And I do think it's personality. And I also think I've come to see that drive and that season of life as being something of a gift, because as you said, many never hit that wall. And so they can live the rest of their lives under the delusion that there is something to this, right? Because they never go as far as the wall. They either stay in whatever the little city is. Truman
they turn back when the storm starts, right? And
exactly.
It took a very specific moment for Truman to go, I'm going to keep going. Like, that's exactly some seriously sketchy life choices in some ways. You got to really make that choice. Most people go, I'm good. I think I'm going to turn back to what I know and what's working.
Yeah. And so and they never hit the wall. And so they're never able to exit and be this newly created person. And I think I think this disposition is actually something of a gift, because I and you and others who have that kind of obsessive personality are able to, with experience, look at people and say, hey man, I'm telling you, I have walked this path as far as it can be walked. And there isn't, at the end of it, there is not what you've been told is at the end of it. And so I really think it's a gift. And I think it's, Jesus says the blind can't lead the blind because you'll both fall into a ditch. But I think the ditch is exactly what some of us need. And so in a sense, the blind can lead the blind, because the ditch is where you need to be led, so you can realize I'm following the wrong path and the wrong thing. And so that's what that whole season of life really, really was for me. I think it was a gift, so that I can now, on the other side of it, say, okay, I now know for a fact that this path does not lead where I was told it leads, and I think I can speak with more conviction because of that. But at that point, I think I probably became a pastor way too young, and I wasn't prepared for the human suffering I'd encounter, just the various situations I'd encounter, and how much it would take out of me, because I'm the man of the hour, full of faith and power. I'm going to be the next John G. Lake, Smith Wigglesworth, whatever. Got, Roberts Liardon, if he lives long enough, will have to write a whole nother God's General book just about me. That's kind of the hope. That's kind of the history maker thing we grew up with in the 90s and early 2000s. And boy, I found myself in the midst of pastoring, and it just wasn't working. And I wasn't doing anything wrong. I mean, as far as I knew, I was still praying and fasting every other day and going after God. I started and failed more 40-day fasts than anybody on the planet, probably. And that's a bit of an exaggeration, I'm sure. But, I was going for it, and stuff just wasn't working. People were dying who weren't supposed to be dying. Cancers that were supposed to be melting under my touch were taking people out aggressively in like a matter of a month. And this was I'll never forget being at one guy's, this guy had been a part of our lives for decades, even from when I was a kid. And now I'm here serving as one of his pastors, and he's dying of cancer, aggressive cancer. And, praying for him, I'm in that mindset of, this is, John G. Lake, he put plague on his hand and it dies. I mean, certainly it's going to die when I touch it. And I'm in that mindset, and and this guy, before my eyes, I thought he died, and then he's fighting and holding on because his family's all around him. And then he like gasps and comes to and like grabs his son and is like, promise me you'll always stay together. And he's like fighting to breathe and stay alive. And in that moment, I just realized how useless I was. Not really, but like I came in as the
awkward element in this room, really.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, the Homer Simpson into the bushes. Like, I don't belong here in this moment. My presence is not having the effect it was supposed to have. And wow, it was moments like that of just that a guy like me, things are supposed to go a different way for you than they were going. And it just showed me that this is not working. And then when it really began to affect my familial relationships, my relationship with my wife, a lot of it just came crashing down. And so the experience was really hellish at the time, and several years of just really, I could only call it a dark night of the soul, death of God experience, where I just didn't know what way was up, which way was down. And I was still trying. And that's the last book I wrote, The Atheistic Theist. A lot of it comes out of that season, because I really did for a while just lose God entirely, and I didn't know if I believed anything anymore, and I'm preaching and I'm teaching still, but I'm doing so as like, for all intents and purposes, as an atheist on some of these occasions. And I've come to find out that if a pastor hasn't preached as an atheist on at least 2 occasions in his life, he's probably shouldn't be preaching anyways. But it was tough, man. It was really, really rough.
I bet.
But I also feel like it really purified my understanding of God. And I think it had to happen. I'm not saying it was the plan of God that it happened that way. I'm sure it could have happened many other ways.
Yeah.
But for me and for the way that I'm wired, I think that I had to have the extreme breaking in order to really be freed from those thoughts and those ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think we all know this. We see people, you can maybe it's a bit easier as adults looking at small children or whatever. And you try and teach certain children certain lessons, right? And you're like, well, this worked for little Julie, but for Barbara, man, she is not picking it up. And it's like, she's going to walk off that into the ditch. And it's like, I've tried telling her, I've tried asking Julie to tell her that she's learned that it doesn't work. And she's going for the ditch. She's like, screw you guys, I'm going for the ditch. And you're like,
yes.
Okay, let's do the ditch. I'll get 911 in the speed dial ready to go for the ambulance, but I can't not make you go for the ditch. And I think it is frustrating that we all probably have those blind sides in our life. And so for some of us, it might not be in faith, it might be in our relationships, it might be whatever, in work or whatever. But there is something, I mean, I've got to say, your book, Atheistic Theist, I recommend it heavily. It's on my book list that I recommend. Like, it's a fantastic book, and it captures that you learned through this process, right? It wasn't just that dark night of the soul that you just crumbled away and that was it. I mean, this is some profound kind of like process, and some profound wisdom and truth comes out of it. And I do wonder actually sometimes if God is remotely worried about these kind of things. You know, a lot. It feels that so much of Christianity is about avoiding the ditches. You know, like you're saying, you're in the room with the dying person, and all you can think, you've got your blinkers on, and you were like, I need to save this person. I need to heal this person. I need to whatever. And having been in the room with dying people, especially people connected to me, like my mother, or you know, like, and you're like, I don't need you to be healed right now, in a sense. Obviously, that's my first choice. Yes.
Yeah.
But actually, for me to fixate on that, and then for my mother to die, I've lost a lot of potential that was there. There's the potential of connecting. There's a potential of learning something deep from this moment, from being present in her suffering, with her, you know, and we kind of, we do miss a lot of those things. I'm really fascinated by, I guess, just how we quantify what's good and bad, really, I guess is what it boils down to, right? So I see the ditch as bad. If I need to call 911 for an ambulance, well, something bad has happened. And it makes me think of, you know, the Chinese proverb of the farmer who loses his horses. I don't know if you've heard this, but there's a farmer, he loses one of his horses, it runs away, comes back, and it brings like 5 wild horses, and everyone's like, this is good. And he's like, maybe. And then the next day his son's rearing the wild horses, and he breaks his arm, and everyone's like, oh, that's bad. And he's like, oh, maybe. And then he can't go to war because he's broken his arm, and they're like, oh, that's good news, maybe. And it just keeps going, because what we think is good turns out to be bad. But then because we've labeled it bad, actually it does turn out to be good. And we just don't know. Do you think that's a cosmic truth that we can kind of hold? Or do you think there's probably a bit more nuance to it than to just, well, nothing's good, nothing's bad. I'm not at all saying, you know, rape is good, murder is good, or it's not bad, I guess is what I'm not saying. Do you think there's something in the way people approach faith that is too rooted in these judgments of this is good and this is bad, this is what the situation should look like, this is the outcome that we should be having, this is what I should be doing, all these kind of like very black and white determinisms of what's right and what's wrong? Do you have thoughts on that? Because it feels like that's something that you kind of demonstrate really well in the way that you write and what you talk about, how you communicate with people.
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And I think, you know, I think we, like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Eden as a metaphor, you know, I don't think it was necessarily the fact that they were never supposed to eat of it. It's just that in the state they were in, they couldn't have handled it yet. But I do think, had that spoke not been, or that spike not been shoved in the spoke of the bicycle of perfection, that in the story as they matured, they would have been allowed to, and God would have shared that with them. And I think it does take a journey and some maturity to kind of begin to actually deal with concepts of good and evil correctly. Because I think in immaturity, those are things we just use to, again, you know, otherize, and not only out here externally with people, but even in ourselves. I think when it comes to like good and evil and things happening to us in our lives, I really like the Kabbalistic concept of Zimzum, you know, which says that God creates a space within God's self where his presence is not overbearing and overwhelming. Because if the infinite creates the finite, once the finite emerges from the infinite will immediately consume it, and it'll never have a chance to be and become and grow and be created. And so God creates a space within God's self. And this is just a metaphor, of course, but I think it works, that God creates a space within God's self. It's not apart from him, but where creation can actually come forth and be created without being immediately swallowed up by the infinite nature of the creator. So it's like the helicopter parent, you know, God in a sense steps back, but not in a sense of separating himself from us. It's not the same thing. It's actually a form of presence by stepping back, because it's intentional. Like when I let my children experience consequences for their actions, that's not me abandoning them. That's actually a form of presence. It's actually an extension of myself, even if it requires me maybe taking a step back. I'm still actually working and doing something, by stepping back. And I think a lot of life is way less controlled and way less dominated by either God or darkness than we think it is. And I think a lot of times things just happen in this space where God is not overwhelming what he's created, but he's allowing what we are to come forth. And I think, we'll call it good and evil. And then we think we understand the universe and we understand what's going on. But I don't think we really do. I think there's more potential in us than we'll ever realize. And if God hovers, he will smother that potential. And so I think it's like a haiku, a very, very simple and short poem. I mean, what is it? 5, 7, and 5, 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllables, I think. And yet more emotion can be packed into a haiku than some people can pack into an entire novel. And that's because the page is mostly blank and every word is intentional. And the mostly blank page puts a pressure on those words and their potential comes forth. But if you cram the page with words, sometimes even very intentional words will lose their potential, will just be skimmed right over. And so I think the way that the world works is probably more like that God, it's not always just a matter of, good and evil directly affecting and interacting with us. It's something probably much more like the full nature of God resides within you. And God allows you to exist in a world where the good and the bad will touch your life. And it's not a result of him pushing any buttons or pulling any levers. It's just the world happens. I mean, in the Crab Nebula, there's all kinds of chaos going on. It's just that so far as we know, some of those molecules aren't conscious. So they're not like judging the situation. Like, why is everything always exploding up here? What's with all this gas? I mean, they're not thinking that way, but we're a segment of the cosmos that God has woken up. And so when we experience that same kind of chaos, we judge it and we say it's either this or it's that. But I think, in fact, it's us just being allowed to live in this space where chaos is present, order is present, beauty is present, ugliness is present. You can look at a sunrise coming over the ocean or sunset, and it's beautiful. Somebody else could be getting attacked by a great white shark a few miles away in the same ocean, and your experience of the same thing is very different.
He's not enjoying the sunset.
He's not enjoying it, and it's like it's not. But it's not a matter of God doing this or the devil doing this. I think it's God allowing us to live in a universe where things happen, and we can interact with him in this universe, and he will interact with us as well. But I think, just to speak to what you were saying, I don't think everything's this simple matter of good and evil. And we want it to be, because we want control. We want to know. We want certainty. We want to be able to divide our lives up into those neat little packages. But I just don't think it works that way. And I think the older we get and the more it doesn't even really necessarily come with age, but the more we are on this journey and embrace this journey, I think the more we come to see that.
Yeah. Do you see, I guess one of the things that I like what you said, it doesn't necessarily come with age. I do think that age is, to some degree, something that it just gives us a longer time to realize this, right? If nothing else, that's basically it, right? Sometimes I'm stupid enough that I just need the extra 20 years, like that's just it, right? But so I think age does play into like you increasing in your chances of it. Although certain personalities, the longer you live in something, the more you knuckle down as well. And so there is that as well. But do you think, what do you think is because this works individually, but it also works as a grander scheme of things like the species, and to me, I don't see this just working its way out in me, you, someone else I'm reading on Facebook, or someone that's attacking me, and I'm going, oh, okay, they're being very dualistic. They're deciding what's right and what's wrong, and they might be right, they might be wrong, but I'm not going to try and take it too personally. I'm going to try and transcend above that. It's all very personal. It's all about individuals. But do you think in the same way there's a trajectory and a scope for humanity as a whole moving beyond this? Like, do you think give us another 100 years, 1,000 years, I don't know, 10 years, I don't know, hopefully. Do you think that there's a way for humanity to transcend this? Or do you think this is just deeply rooted in who we are? We all will have to go through this to some degree or another. I don't know if you think about that sort of stuff. I live in that headspace, just staring at a wall, thinking about that kind of thing. So,
I do. And I think, but at the same time, I don't think we'll ever overcome the need for the journey or the struggle. I just think the journey and the struggles themselves will evolve, and what it is we're journeying and what it is we're struggling with, I think will evolve. But I think the development of the human, I think it's always going to work the same, at least for the foreseeable future. A million years down the line, things might drastically change. I mean, here we are. We're not in trees anymore, where things have changed drastically. But at the same time, the basic things haven't. You know what I mean? We're still kind of struggling with the basic things our ancestors, hundreds of thousands of years ago struggled with. They're in different forms now, because now it's not about food and whatever. It's about mundane stuff, really, sometimes, compared to maybe what they were facing. But I think that will evolve. But I think the basic struggle will always be there. And that's just my opinion, but I really do. I think we all began in Eden, and I think it's a metaphor for life. I think that's where we all start. And we all start in this place of naivete and simplicity and thinking the world is a certain way. And not everybody's Eden looks the same. Some people grow up in an Eden where there's child abuse and things like this. And there's when I say naive simplicity,
that's not necessarily a nice, enjoyable thing.
It's not exactly,
but it's all
it is. It's all and the world works a certain way. But at some point, you partake of some fruit and you ingest some knowledge, and that forces an expulsion from that place of simplicity and naivete.
Yeah.
And then, Paul Ricoeur says you can either then stand at a critical distance and judge those still within as being naive and simple-minded and stupid, and why can't you see what I see? Or you can stand there looking back at the good old days and wishing you were back in. But the truth of the matter is the gateway is now guarded, and you can never go back in. Once you experience that once you ingest that knowledge, once life serves you with what life serves you, you can't go back in that way. It's over with. You just can't. And so you can stand there and judge. You can stand there in nostalgia, or you can just begin to walk through the world, right? And this comes from Paul Ricoeur, but eventually you walk this world and you discover you're walking with God through the broken world. And you discover the world is larger than Eden. And you realize that God can dwell in places other than the perfect. And you come to discover God out here. You come to discover God in these places of suffering and brokenness. And I never, in my naive simplicity, I didn't realize such a thing was even possible. And if you do this long enough, you eventually return to Eden. Only now you've returned to Eden from the other side, because you went around the globe. And so now you can actually enter back in. But when you enter back in, you see everything from a different angle and everything from a different perspective. And even though you're in the same place again, nothing is the same. Not only because you're entering in from a new angle, but also because you're entering in with a new perspective. And now you also understand that I can leave this and I can experience God out here, or I can experience God in here. And I think that's the development of the human soul. I think, Nietzsche calls it the parable of the camel, the lion, and the child. And thus spoke Zarathustra, that we all began as camels who bear other men's burdens. And we think we chose them. We think we chose these things, and we carry them gladly, until we go into the wilderness and we encounter the dragon called Thou Shalt. And on every scale, there's another Thou Shalt written. And then we realize we haven't been, it's not ourselves we've been serving this beast. And so he says, then you become a lion. The camel becomes a lion, and he roars his sacred no in the face of the dragon, Thou Shalt. And he roars no to all the Thou Shalts. And he's like, but that's not the final stage of development. The final stage of development is the child, which you'd think the child is where you start, but the child is actually where you should end, because I think that's what it is to be born again. It's what Ricoeur called that second naivete, where I think it's, I can't remember her name. I always forget her name. She's the intellectual heiress of Jung, but she said that it's one thing to be a naive idealist, and it's another thing to be like a bitter, jaded realist. but it's another thing entirely to hold no delusions and still hold the inner flame, you know?
Wow.
And I think that's that journey we all have to go on, that we do all begin as naive idealists, and then we become bitter, jaded realists at some point. And there's going to be some overlap, and it's not always going to be exactly the same journey for everybody. But I think the point is to get back to this place where we don't hold any delusions anymore. I'm not in the simplicity of Eden. That's been shattered. And I'm not the angry lion just roaring no all the time either. I'm a child again, and I'm born again, and I choose naivete in a way.
Yeah.
And it's not because it's my only option. I have other options. I've been an atheist for seasons of my life. I could go back to Christopher Hitchens pretty quickly. But I choose naivete now, and it's a whole different thing. And so, like, he says, this is where we learn to say a sacred yes, and this is where we actually learn to do the work of creation. Now is this place of being a child, and I think that's the journey. And I don't know if we'll ever get over the need for that.
Yeah.
But I think as we all do it generationally, we're all kind of on, because you and I'm sure we have a very similar journey. It might not be exactly the same, but I'm sure we've gone through a lot of the same stages.
Sure.
And what's insane to me, and I know you have a whole network where you hear these stories and these journeys people are on and things like that, is we've all been on the same journey, not even knowing it. And it was like, it always just reminds me of Ezekiel's vision. The spirit of the living creatures are in the wheels. And so whatever way the creatures move, the wheels move. And it's like the same, we're all children of the same God. So whatever way that wind is blowing, we're all going to be moving that same direction, even if we don't know anyone else is. And before the advent of social media, we just weren't connected enough to know that we were all on these same journeys. And now we're like, oh, we're all doing the same thing. So I think generationally, we're going to grow up and we're going to get over this stage we're in. But I think the next generation is going to have their own. And but I don't think the journey itself will ever get over the need for that journey. I don't think.
Sure. Yeah. It's almost an element of there's maybe more grand reflections of these micro stages that we individually go through. Maybe culture and society as a whole is moving forward within those, but in the midst of that, we're still going to have to go through these stages. Is kind of what I'm kind of hearing you say to some degree.
Yeah. If you zoom in on, I look like a solid object, but if you zoom in, I'm not a solid object.
Yeah.
And all of these things have to move and do what they do for me to maintain solidity, and I think what we are corporately and as a whole, it's made up of these individual journeys, and we can't make it solely about the individual journey. We have to connect to the larger experience, but we also have to respect the fact that I think, because at first I was hyper individualistic and everything was about my relationship with God. And then I came to a point where it was like, I took on a more progressive mindset of, I need to jettison the individualism and focus more on corporate stuff. And then I also kind of realized that that's also a convenient way of hiding from the things going on in my life, to get lost in a corporate reality. And now I just realize it's just both and.
Absolutely. Something I'm really intrigued by, because we're both in our day in, day out. A lot of what we're doing is we're sharing our journeys. We're trying to assist people on their journeys, and yet there's this balance between understanding that people will go on their journeys at the pace they go on, will take the paths and the slight twists and turns that they take and they need to take. A bit like you trying to stop the kid running into the ditch, but you're like, oh, okay, I've tried about 20 different things and they're running into the ditch. Okay, fine. Do you wrestle with that to some degree of, it almost comes back into this judgment thing of like you're saying, you can't escape helping when you do evolve from one stage to a new stage, you can't help on some level looking at the stage you were in and going, oh, that's a stage before where I am now. We can look at different models, spiral dynamics, integral theory, all these different models that go, well, no, yes, but no, it's not about a hierarchical system, but there's something in us that still looks at it hierarchically on some sort of level. And that's okay as well in some sense as well. Maybe at a certain stage we transcend that and we completely, I don't know, we become the Buddha and everything's all one. I don't know. Right. But do you struggle with the dynamic of, like, you want to help people? You want to help people, especially if you go, oh gosh, that's a prior stage, and I know what helped me move into the next stage, and I think I might be able to share some insights. Do you struggle with the element that on some level you're observing this, you're judging what they should be doing, how they should be moving forward. How do you strike the balance in that when you're trying to communicate truth, help people, guide people in their growth without being presumptuous in knowing where they need to go? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think being a parent's kind of helped me see this, that
Okay.
you have a vision for your child's life, and you want them. I don't think you can. I think some people will say maybe they're just the most progressive parents on the planet, and they're just going to let their child just become whatever they want to be. Nobody really is that way. Everyone has a vision for what they want their child to become. We all do, whether we admit it or not. And we try to gently push them in that direction. Yeah. But at some point, genetics, whatever, take over, and you realize they're just not going to be that. And I can't force them to be that. And the more that I try to force them to be that, the more miserable they are. I have to let them be carried by who they are. And I have to learn to be a steward of who they are, not force them to be what I want them to be. So when you're dealing with individuals on these journeys, I think we can acknowledge and observe that someone is on a journey. And we don't have to, as you said, judge the stage and be like, oh yeah, you're where I was 2 stages ago, because they might not be. Truth is, they might be ahead of me in some way, for all I know, because it doesn't always work this way. I think in some way there are stages that are observable, but it's not going to look that way in my life, because again, my Eden was quite literally like an Eden. I grew up with 2 very healthy parents, my very functional family. Everything was great. I didn't experience adversity till I was in my 20s, and on my own. But other people's childhood looks nothing like that. And so the journey is going to look different, even though it might technically be the same stages. The manifestation, how those stages look are going to be different depending on who you are. So I think in what I do, I did used to be very like, oh no, I see where they're going with this. Oh, you don't go down that path. I've seen people go down that path. That's going to lead you into full-on atheism, or that's going to lead you into wild-eyed fundamentalism, or that's going to lead you into unhinged progressivism, or that's going to lead you into New Age thought, or what? All these things we think we know. If people start down this path, oh no, they're reading the Tao Te Ching. That means they're going here, or no, they're reading this now, and we think we know, and it's like we don't know. And I've just come to understand that by really observing my own journey. And it's like I have explored all kinds of avenues, all kinds of things, but I just always keep being pulled back to one thing. Yep. And I think I've learned to trust in others that, I think ultimately that's where you're coming back to as well. And it might take eternity for you to come back to that. And again, that still could be me judging and thinking I know where they're coming back to. But all I really have is my own experience to work with. But, I have people who are like, man, if it wasn't for your ministry, I wouldn't be a Christian anymore. And then I have people who are like, man, if it wasn't for you, I'd still be a Christian, and they're thanking me. Like, now I'm an atheist and thank you. And I'm like, you're welcome, I guess, but it's like, and sometimes, as one who is, I am a Christian. I fully embrace that. And I follow Jesus to the best of my ability every day of my life. And but I also recognize that atheism for some could be the pathway to a purer form of Christianity. And maybe they need to shed all of the religion in order for them to actually embody a Christ-like life, because maybe when ensconced in religion, they're too oppressed to do that. And maybe there's a goodness in them that is the nature of God that is trying to express itself, but it's just impossible for them to express that in the confines of religion because of, their programming and how they think of it. And so maybe they need to lose it all in order to actually be liberated to be the good person that they are. And I just have to trust that's the journey. And I can't judge it, and that's who they are, like my children. Maybe I wanted you to be an athlete and you're more into computers, or, maybe I wanted you to be a bookworm and you're an athlete. It's like, you just have to observe, okay, this is this person's journey. And it's not my job to be like, oh no, you're getting off track here. My job is just to recognize they're on a journey. I've been on one. Here's some things that have helped me. Maybe they'll help you. If not, feel free to throw it overboard, and and it's sometimes easier said than done, for sure. But especially having been a pastor where your job was kind of micromanaging people's lives, But one, that gets so friggin' exhausting. I don't want to do that.
So unrealistic, isn't it?
It is. It is. You can't. It's impossible. It doesn't work. And again, I've learned from my kids how the vision I had for them when they were born and who they've actually become, night and day, absolutely night and day. And I couldn't control it. There's nothing I could have even done about it. Even the things I put in their lives that I was like, okay, hey, maybe this will spark an interest in this. No, it doesn't work. There's something in them that's stronger than my influence. And that's what's going to ultimately win. And my job is just to be like, okay, that's where you're going. Maybe I haven't even gone down that path. Maybe I don't even really understand that, but I'll just be here to help you do it safely and hopefully not hurt yourself in the process of becoming who you are. And I think we can know the principle, but not force one down our path, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. And I think, man, that's something I struggle with. Like I definitely struggle with it less than I used to. But man, do I struggle with people coming to me in the past, certainly coming to me and going like, this is what I'm doing and this is what it's looking like. And I can go, I'm already going, okay, so that leads to that. And then, okay, so you're next going to go there, or you're going to go here. And how can I help you go to the right one? Or, there's some different junctures you might go down and I want to try and guide you. And it's taking me a lot of work to kind of let go of that. I'm not a parent yet. So that's probably a big lesson for sure. Like you're saying, it's really struck me, one of the things, the group of people, the world that kind of has gravitated to me is self-described as deconstructing. I don't know if I like the term or don't like the term. There's pros and cons to different terms and labels, and anytime you put a label on anything, it's immediately captured and lost. But it strikes me fascinating that everyone will describe deconstructing a little differently. It's one of the things, because one of the things I did was I started, people would come to me and go, I'm all alone. There's no one like me. And I'm like, trust me, there's people like you. This is the fastest growing movement within Christianity right now, in the West, at least. It's the largest and fastest growing movement. So there's probably 5 people on your street. The problem is you don't all get together to go to deconstruction church, or, I don't go to church. So I started this little network and called it the Deconstruction Network. So I thought that'll help people put a name to it. And basically the idea is you can put yourself on a map and you can find other people that are in that location. And it's been great. It's wonderful for people to find each other. But one of the things I kind of almost, I knew this would have been an issue if I thought about it, but I think I was just naively like, oh, this will be great. Just let people talk to each other and connect. And maybe it's because I've let go of a lot of my need to judge and for people to be on a certain path. But what struck me is how different people are. So you can click in LA and there's 28 people in LA, but if your path of deconstruction, your spiritual path is taking you off one trajectory and you haven't got to the place where you hold things a bit more open, you are still a little bit dualistic, a bit fundamental about this is the way it should be. So my path, my deconstruction is right. You could talk to the other 27 people in LA and all you're going to do is have a fight. And so it really fascinates me, just the diversity of people's journeys, how multifaceted. And it strikes me, for a long time, I had the heart to help people that were pastors, because I have a great love for the church, and my path is in the church. Is what I live my life in. I want to help people that are going through this, because it's just as painful for those that stay in the system to watch people leave as it is for those who leave looking back going, I wish I could still be there a little bit. And initially my thought was, if I can just help pastors understand what this is, then they'll be able to deal with it better. The problem is you can't really give them this is what it looks like and this is what it is, because it is so multifaceted. How do you go about engaging with people that are still very much rooted in the worldview they have, maybe a bit more in kind of a fundamental Christianity? I don't necessarily mean you're Westboro Baptist, but you can be quite even progressive liberal. The progressive church can be very fundamental, and so people that are in that place of going, well, this is what Christianity is, this is what faith should look like. How do you go about interacting with those types of people? Because I know they'll send you messages, because they send me messages, or I know that you probably have a few, maybe friends, family, people from your past. How do you go about kind of making them feel safe, making them feel not threatened in their own faith, that you're not trying to impinge on them, because I know that's not your heart, but also strike the balance of being yourself, being authentic, being able to share where you're at. Like, is that something that you found you can do well? Is it something that you struggle with? Like, what's been your path in learning how to have those interactions?
Yeah. I think I have an easier time with it now than I did, for sure. Because I think some of that really kind of died in me during some of the darker seasons, where I really kind of lost that vibe of being a proselytizer. Because I kind of went in my darker seasons, I really just realized how we're all the same thing, you know, and I don't really have I don't really have a one up on you. I really don't. Maybe I have some wisdom to offer, but I'm not Mr. Evangelist here to save the world, either the deconstructive evangelist or the progressive evangelist or whatever. I just, you know, and so I think of something you said though, and I want to just speak to and then get back on this, but how deconstruction looks differently for everyone. Because I remember, like, in the early days of the grace movement, everyone was saying, like, man, I cannot wait to see what the next generation looks like, who never grew up with all of this legalism. The next generation who grew up only, like, knowing only pure grace. I can't wait to see what they look like. And I always thought to myself, it might not look like what you want it to look like, because part of development is always a little bit of diverging from what you grew up with. And so if you grow up in pure grace, we may end up with some deconstruction for the person who grows up in a highly progressive, inclusive environment, might temporarily lead them down the path of fundamentalism. You know, and so that might be what deconstruction looks like for someone, you know, and because again, they're taking apart their belief system and the structure they were raised in. And this is something different, maybe, and they might come to the conclusion this is false and return or whatever, but you can't map it out, I think, that simply, you know. And I think people really want to think they can control it, and it's like a child. You can't control a child. You can have all the dreams you want for it, but once that thing is here, it's going to do what it's going to do. And you can lend a hand in helping them become that, but you certainly can't control it. And so I think embracing the idea that deconstruction, it's a phenomenon, but it's not something you can capture and pin to a corkboard like a moth. And this is what deconstruction looks like. It's going to be wildly different depending on the person, but the same phenomenon is at work. You know, and I think recognizing the work and the phenomenon and how it functions is how you can connect with people. Because if someone, let's say someone went, because it is already happening now. I've been doing what I do, like, online for probably about 10 years now, which I think is probably when we first connected, somewhere around that time. And I mean, we really have seen things drastically shift in the last 10 years, to the point where there are some kids now who, well, were kids when I started, who are like 20 now or something like that, or in their mid 20s, who are like, yeah, I've been following you since I was like 15 on Facebook. And, you know, grew up in a more grace-filled environment, but now who are actually like, you know, I don't know, I think maybe we need to get back to the fundamentals, and they're becoming more fundamentalist in their approach to things. And I'm like, well, that's not what we were trying to do at all. And it's like, doesn't matter what you're trying to do. People, deconstruction is going to do its thing, and people are going to journey their journeys. So we have to recognize what the phenomenon, what the action, what the work is, and be able to recognize it. And we can relate to people on that level rather than just where they are and what they believe right now. And so that's been the one thing that I think if I can connect with people at all, it's because I can recognize the phenomenon, and we both experienced it, and it looks different for both of us. But it's the same thing we're being carried by. And I think it's like Paul says to the Galatians, you know, in Christ, there is no Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free. When we meet on that plane of Christ, our place where we're at, it's all dissolved. It's all gone. And here we are, just humans in a process and on a journey. And that's who we are in Christ. And we may believe completely differently, but when we meet in Christ, all the things we think define us should melt away. And I think that's what church really should be, is that, like, you know, I don't care what you believe. I don't care if you're an atheist. I don't care if you're hardcore theist, fundamentalist. Here we can meet together, and all those things are dispensed of, and we're people on a journey, and I can recognize you on yours, and you can recognize me on mine, And that's what we can connect on. And it does become more difficult when someone's journey has led them into a place of maybe hardcore judgmentalism, because then
more black and white thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think you have to just be like, well, I'm willing to be here with you if you're willing to be here with me. And if not, it's okay. And then you have to trust as well that they'll be carried where they need to go.
Yeah.
And it's not your job to manipulate and force that person into a. And I think that's what faith is. Faith is trusting. I think it's Alan Watts who said that faith is basically trusting yourself to the river and trusting that it's going to take you somewhere better than you are right now, essentially. And faith, it's not only individually, but it can be that corporately as well. Like, I can't spend my life trying to control you. So it was even like the thing that I felt like God spoke to me when I was lamenting about my years as a hellfire and brimstone preacher. And how am I going to like help fix and resolve all this? And I really felt God said, where you can make amends, do it. Where you can help, do it. But at the same time, you also have to understand that some things are out of your hand at this point. And even though you might feel responsible, you also have to trust, even though you feel you hurt, that they'll journey their journey. And it's not like, where you can, do it, but where you can't, just trust, And I think, I don't know, really letting go of that control has been really revolutionary for me, because I tried to control everything and everyone at one point in my life. And it just forced, it's terribly exhausting, and you're trying to force things to be what they're not. And at the end, you think you've put this puzzle together, but it's all just a jumbled mess because you've just shoved pieces where they don't belong anyway. So you're not going to end up with the masterpiece you think you're going to end up with, if that's the way you approach the world. But if you trust and let things be, I think you're going to come out with something beautiful at the end.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by, so this is something that I've so intentionally worked on. If there's intentionality, again, driven, single-minded focused, it's been, how do I integrate with people that are on slightly different paths? How do I come alongside them and just to join them on their journey and get excited for them and be their cheerleader and just help them in any way I can? And how do I work with that fundamental person that's going to go, no, you're completely wrong. I laugh because I was thinking of a conversation I had with Tilly, my wife's grandmother, who's, I don't know how old, but late 70s, I think she is. And so quite old. And she was saved at like 12 or something like that. And I was just talking to her, just trying to explain on some level where I'm at without giving her an existential crisis, because I know where she's at. And she's, been in the Baptist church her whole life from that period. And Baptist means slightly different things in Europe than it does in America. It's a bit more broad and open. But I tried to touch on it, and just like, how when you look back at your faith, you have these moments where God shows he's bigger than you thought he was. And it feels like it changes everything. And you have these major moments where you change and you just see God differently. And she just looked at me deadpan, like 100% serious. She really believed what she said. And she said, no, I've never once changed my belief about God. And I was like, all right, you're working with 65 plus years of genuinely believing you've never once changed your belief. Now I can observe her life and go, you've changed your life. Like, I can see how it's changed. You've told me ways that your life changed and how you saw God differently, or, and so, but there's this thing of like, no, I've never changed. And that kind of mentality, I quickly just was like, let's just, wasn't it a nice day yesterday? Let's just change quickly before we give someone an existential crisis, because it's not my heart at all. And so there's people like that. So I'm really intentionally working on, okay, I don't need to control this person. I don't need for this person to change. And as long as I can make sure that they aren't giving themselves a heart attack over me being me, if I can help with that, I will. But otherwise, I can't even help that. The thing that fascinates me about this need to control, this need to guide, I think about when I started understanding the grace message, as it was commonly called. I was like, dude, I need to let the whole world know they're wrong. And I can tell you how you're wrong. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll convince you. If that's not enough, I've got 18 weeks of material for me to tell you every single Bible verse and how it's proven that I'm right and you're wrong. It was very much like, I can get you in the right belief. And that's something I really have had to work at letting go of. One of the things that I find the potential for this kind of concept and this way of framing life to have incredible freedom for me that I haven't seen nearly as much as I would is, I'm a control freak internally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really easily prone to anxiety when things don't go my way, when things change. I'm a little bit autistic, so that's probably a part of it. But you know, if something doesn't go my way, or someone cancels last minute, or you know, there's a fire, you know, I'm like, you know, I'm not
Yeah.
like, you know, sitting there zen and going, what is, and we'll just see where the river takes me.
Yeah.
How is this kind of approach affected you on a more personal level in how you handle life internally, as opposed to just these relational elements of like speaking to people about faith and things like that? Is that something you've seen a big shift or change, or is that not something that you've particularly seen?
Most definitely, because yeah, excuse me, who I was spiritually, obviously that's who I was in the real world as well. So if I'm a control freak trying to manipulate the cosmos through prayer and fasting, I am most certainly doing that in everyday life as well, you know. And you know, with everything, wanting marriage to work a certain way, my parenting to work a certain way, everything, you know, I'm very OCD. I'm very things have to be my way. When I go in if I clean, you know, everything is turned at a certain angle and it matches. I mean, that's my personality.
How many kids do you have?
And if it's moved at all, like even in front of me right now, I have my books and my AirPod case, and it's all at a particular angle, and that just makes me feel safe. And if it goes off a little bit, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, so that's just how my brain works, you know. Yeah. And like if my office gets even messy a little bit, I just can't work in there. And then I'll just let it get messy for like a month. And then I'll never go in it. And then I'll go in one day and just like gut it and clean it. Like, okay, now I can work here.
Have the best 3 days of work you ever had, and then it falls
apart.
Exactly.
Yeah, until one of the kids goes in there and it gets messed up again. And I'm like, you know, okay, 3 months later, I'll see it. You know, I'll see you in 3 months. But that's just how my brain works. Everything has to be a certain way, and I want to control things. And honestly, I just think, and this isn't really that deep or profound of a principle, but I just think seeing the failure of that approach to life in areas other than the cleanliness of my office just showed me it just doesn't work, and you just have to let it go. And that sounds very simple when I say it that way. It was not very simple coming to that conclusion. I was forced to come to that conclusion, you know, again, through relationships and things failing me that just weren't supposed to fail because I did things the quote unquote right way. And things like that don't happen to guys like me who order their lives like this. But surprise, surprise, they happened anyways. And so what do you do with that? You have to accept it, or you can live in denial, you know. And it's like that expulsion from Eden moment. Once you eat that fruit, you're not going back in. Yeah. You know, you that naivete is shattered, and you can't go back that way ever again. And so I think for me, just seeing the ineffectiveness of that way of living, just it doesn't work. I just can't go back there. And I've had to just learn to be still and let things be what they are and guide. And again, I think parenting really tamed me with that, because just really seeing the development of your children and that, man, there's nothing I can do about this. This person is on that track. They are. And if I force them off of that track, I'm going to kill them. So you just have to let it be, you know. And I don't know, just very simple things like that in life have taught me that. And I've definitely seen it. I just don't care to control anyone anymore. I really just don't. I've lost that desire. I exhausted myself whilst pastoring, trying to do that and seeing it doesn't work anyways. And man, the peace that comes just from letting the river flow and seeing what beautiful things comes of that. I mean, it's way more rewarding again than trying to force puzzle pieces where they don't belong and then ending up with a jumbled mess at the end anyway. It's like, you know, I worked so hard to put this together, but these pieces don't match. And so I'm not even rewarded with the puzzle at the end, you know? And so, but seeing the reward of just letting things be and being like, this really does work. And it really is a better way of living.
And man, there's this whole world of surprise and you live in the moment and all these different elements that definitely play out in that. And man, do I want to tap into that world a bit more. What were resources and people, different religions, different frameworks of spirituality? You mentioned people like, you know, Alan Watts, and, you know, like, I mean, incredible thinkers. who were kind of your guides in this? Who were the people that were holding your hand as you were kind of going through this process?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them. In my early days, I was not really open to anything too exotic.
Okay.
I was beginning to see God as, pardon me. I was
fine.
beginning, got a cough into the elbow. Sorry. COVID. I was beginning to see God as more gracious. But I was still, again, a little uneasy with certain thinkers. And so guys like Brennan Manning were very good for me in the early days, and softening my heart and really, okay, here's somebody who's kind of elucidating what I'm feeling. So guys like that were great to start with. The more I went down the path, the Torrance brothers, C. Baxter Kruger, guys like that were pretty revolutionary at one point in my life and really helping me to see God as triune and really understand all that. And at some point in my journey, my companions were actually people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Lawrence Krauss and Sam Harris, the four horsemen of the new atheist apocalypse or whatever. These actually became my my guides and my partners in this, because they were asking questions that even the most radical of my theological partners weren't asking. And I found some peace and comfort in their company that I wasn't finding anywhere else in the church. And, so really for a long time, I lived there. I listened to every debate you could ever have listened that's on YouTube. I listened to everything Christopher Hitchens ever said, all this. And it really, it deconstructed a lot of that bad theology I had. And I think it's Simone Weil who said there's two types of atheism. And one is a purification of the notion of God. And that's what I experienced in their company. And so that was a phase of my life. I did go through a time where I really studied Taoism and things like that. And guys like Alan Watts were helpful in that, just because he's he makes it very approachable.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And I really came to see in that, what I really now see as faith, of just resting and letting things be and trusting. So that was very helpful. Man, there's been so many guys like Peter Rollins were a great help to me when I was in that more atheistic phase. Thomas Altizer, who wrote the Gospel of excuse me, who wrote the Gospel of Christian Atheism back in the 60s or 70s. He was a great help to me. Jung was of great help to me. A lot of thinkers. I'm a mishmash of all kinds of different things and thoughts. But I think one time I asked God, and I'm not, it's like, what am I? Like, because like, really, what am I? And I really felt like the impression I had was, I've just called you to be a gatherer of fragments, and that there's truth and beauty and reality and all these different things that are just fragmented and out there. And I like just finding it wherever it is. Yeah. So
it feels like that's a really common thing, isn't it? This when we're in a bit more of a conventional Christian place, maybe a bit more fundamental, a bit more black and white, a bit more dualistic, of like, well, there's these safe, prescribed, boxed in worlds where it's like, how many people go, oh, don't look to the world for wisdom, don't read that, that's another religion, or that's atheist, or that's new age, or it's got to be preferably just the Bible if you can. There's people out there that are like, how dare you even read a whatever, Christian book. But then there is a slightly broader box that I would say the majority of Christians are like, well, of course we can gain great wisdom from Christian writing. But it does feel that that's then a very hard line in the sand, and it's very scary to kind of step over that. It feels like you kind of just dove off a cliff rather than kind of stepping over a line by going from that to like just full-blown atheists, kind of like, your Hitchens, your Dawkins, your Harris, amazing thinkers, wonderful thinkers. And I love that analogy. I don't know if you've seen, there's a really funny clip somewhere on YouTube. I haven't been able to find it again recently. I don't know if it got deleted, but there was a morning show with William Paul Young and Dawkins, and they had them both on, and they were talking about the shack. And it was a morning show. They had like about a minute each. Do you know? I just hate that they do that. This is why I do long form podcasts. I'm like, nobody says anything. Maybe they might think they sound profound in a minute, but honestly, it's nothing. It's like let's get the depth of it. But they basically were like, all right, well, Dawkins, why do you think that what do you think the problem is with the shack? And he said, well, the problem is that the very premise of there being a God is the issue. Like, how can anyone believe in a God that has mothers die of cancer at 40 and leave their families behind? How can anyone believe in a God that has kids born with no limbs? How can anyone believe in a God that sends hurricanes to destroy entire like regions of Southeast Asia? You know, that is a ridiculous notion, and anyone that believes in that kind of God is just insane. And then they were, all right, well, Paul, what do you have to say? And he's like, that was a beautiful articulation. He's like, I could not agree anymore. Thank you so much. I have nothing else to say. Like, and Dawkins' face is amazing, because he's just like,
oh man,
crap, I picked the wrong argument, because
wow,
I've not created any tension here. But I think that sums up that first type of atheism that you're presenting, this atheism that refines, because Dawkins didn't disprove God there. What he did was he said, there's a very good plausible reason to disbelieve in a certain type of God. But I think diving into atheism, what it sounds like it did was it made a lot of these other places quite safe to explore. You know, if you've been living in atheism for a couple of years, sure, I could pick up the Tao. Like, I mean, what's the harm, right? It's not going to be worse.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Do you think, do you see, I'm trying to think how best to put what I was going to, I'm really intrigued by, when we look at different faiths, there's no question there's these incredible overlaps. You know, I've studied the Tao very minimally, and it's something I really would love to give more time to. But when I read through it, I'm like, oh my gosh, did Jesus go for a trip to Asia? Is that why we don't know what's between 12 and 30? Because he was embodying and communicating some fantastic principles that were clearly already established to some degree. Didn't look the same, wasn't worked out the same. I'm not saying like, you know, they were already Christian or whatever, but they definitely were embodying these principles. What do you think about that? Do you think that there is, do you have any onus, because you still identify to some degree as a Christian, you know, you say, yeah, I'm a Christian, following Christ. Yeah. Do you think that do you have any urgency to present Christ in what you do, or does that have a softer dynamic, or a slightly, I'm assuming it's, if at the very least, it's going to have a warped dynamic of what that looks like compared to what it did before. Do you see things like people walking out the Tao? Yeah, I'm a Taoist, or I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a atheist. Do you have a desire for people to connect with the personal Christ? Do you have a concept of a personal Christ, or is it do you see it more cosmically, more universally? How do you see that, and how do you see that play out in different faiths, I guess?
Well, I see it as both, really. I mean, it's cosmic, therefore it can be personal. But I think my job as a preacher, and I see myself as a preacher of the gospel, I see myself as a Christian, 100% identify with that. I have a personal relationship with God in Christ. I mean, I can say these things now in terms that sound very old school and maybe like where we came from, but because of the journey I've been on, they mean different things to me right now. But I mean them fully. But when it comes to my approach to others who maybe don't share my faith, I think my job really is, it's not to reveal to them how far they are from God and how close they can get if they do what I prescribe. I think my job is to show them how close to God they already are. And I think that was Paul's strategy in Athens. I mean, he takes their own religious relics, you know, their own religious symbols and altars. And he says, look, God has embedded himself within your own culture, to the point where he's moved you to reserve an altar for an unknown God, this force that you live and move and have your being in, that you feel and know is real and exists. And your own religion has resulted in the building of this altar of suspicion, I like to call it, where you suspect that there may be something else. And it's a part of your religious tradition. And I'm just here to tell you its name, you know, and not to tell you that you're so far off base, it's ridiculous. And here I am with this 100% different message. No, it's like there is going to be, I think there is a revolutionary twist with the gospel, depending on what culture you're speaking to, but it's not going to be so foreign to people that they're like, this is insane. You know, this is ridiculous. I don't think, to the sincere seeker anyway. I think for the sincere seeker, everything kind of looks the same. I think really when you look at all cultures, the mystics and the ones who really take these things seriously, they're all saying the same thing. You know, the difference is the Christian boils it down to Christ and says, this is, you know, the logos of Heraclitus is Christ. The Tao of the Taoist is Christ. You know what I mean? And these ideas emerge independently of one another at the same time in history. And John comes along and is like, oh, logos, that's Jesus. You know, Chinese missionaries, they go and they're like, oh, the Tao, that's the logos, that's Jesus. You know, I mean, I think the job of the Christian is to see where Christ has been at work throughout history in a person's life and just simply bring that out and reveal it to them, and not say to them, you're so far off base, so far off base. And let me show you, you know, let me bless you with my wisdom and make you more like me. It's, I think, saying, no, man, you've had a lot of things really right. Here I am just to tell you, I think I know its name, you know, and here's this whole other story that I think will only add to what you've been doing, not take away from it. And where there are aspects of things, it doesn't mean nothing will ever need to be shaved off and every practice can just be kept perfectly, because not every practice is harmonious with the gospel of Jesus. So, you know, obviously that's the case as well. But I just think my job is to show people how close they already are and never make them feel like they're cut off and they can get on board if they just do what I did.
Yeah.
You know.
Are you familiar with Stuart Murray? He does quite a bit of writing about different things to do with Christianity, but a lot of his more modern writing in the last kind of couple of decades has been about how Christianity, or how we have as society moved into post-Christendom. So not that we are necessarily post-Christian, but certainly the society that is Christendom. And he's European. And so this is much more my world than yours to a degree, because I know that America is not yet post-Christendom by any shape of the imagination.
Right.
It's maybe on its way, though. I do potentially believe that. But certainly in Europe, the concept of going to church, of even needing to identify as Christian, like because that's where my parents were, or any of these kind of like things that historically that's where we were in Europe, that's kind of died. And so he posits there's an interesting dynamic where he's like, for the first time in well over 1,000 years in Europe, people are able to, quote unquote, preach the gospel. Now, what he thinks preach the gospel means is maybe different to what you would say, probably different to what I would say. But his concept is like, I can go up to someone in Europe, in England, and go, hey, do you know the story of Noah's Ark? And they're like, what's that? And he's like, that's not happened for 1,000 years. He's like, that's just a brand new thing in Europe. And it's interesting how you talk about going into these different faiths, different ways of seeing and framing life, the world, spirituality, and bringing Christ as a twist so that it reveals where he is, but it also subverts and twists and brings a new revelation, a new thing to that culture. Hypothesizing that perhaps Christianity as we know it in the West, in Europe and America, and I know like we are slightly divergent in that Christianity in the West is in Western Europe is largely dying, but hypothesizing that maybe it might not have it quite right. I think we both agree on that to some degree as a whole. What do you think, if we are bringing a fresh message of Christ to the Western audience, that even though it's potentially becoming post-Christendom, it still has Christianity at its root? What do you think are the things that it's carrying that are the message of Christ? And what do you think are the twists that potentially we are starting to see new opportunity when we bring Christ, because we're bringing such a fresh message? People have never heard this kind of message of the gospel that maybe you or I would present. I'm not presuming that we would say the same thing, but that we would certainly say different things, is what I mean by that. What would you see as being things that the West are embodying well about Christ, and then what would you see the twists being in those cultures?
Well, I think a lot of progressive values are, pardon me, I think a lot of progressive values of inclusivism and things of that nature are very, I mean, I think this is a result of the work of Christ within culture, but because we are so entrenched in Christendom, it manifests itself as a rebellion against Christianity. Oftentimes, you know, progressive values often are manifest as this is the result of a breaking away, rather than as a living out of these principles. And I think the church has to recognize that as a good thing, and to not be so quick to try to just, rebuke that and try to stop that. No, we have to be like, this is the movement of God in history. This is God doing this. And, just on like the micro level, when I've seen people who have gone on to be very successful in business, very, very fulfilled in their lives, but who were at first preachers and were miserable as preachers and did bad as preachers and really weren't enjoying it. And then they kind of went away, and people said, oh, they're backsliding, they've lost their calling. But they actually end up moving into a very fulfilling lifestyle and doing things and being able to provide in ways they wouldn't have otherwise. And they're totally content and they're happy. And it's like, that's what you were always supposed to do. And the idea that you had to be in ministry was an impediment to you becoming who you are. And so the movement away from this calling was actually your movement into your calling. And people like that need people to come along and say, no, this is not, you're not rebelling against God in making this move. You're flowing with God. You're on the right path. And I think the movements we see even in culture towards more progressive values and things like this, the message of the church, and I'm not sure if I'm actually speaking to what you asked, I apologize.
No, this is good.
Okay. I think the message of the church in this hour should be, this is it. This is God. This is the movement of God in history. This is not a rebellion. This is not a breaking away. This is actually us coming to a place where we're going to more embody the reality of Christ. And so just like Paul, who's like, no, it's not that you're so off base you can't possibly understand what I'm saying. You live and move and have your being in God. Your own poets said this. In writing a hymn to Zeus, they accidentally preached the gospel. You know what I mean? And so like in doing things that culture might tell you is the opposite of Christianity, you're actually embodying Christianity. And so I think that should be the job of the church in this hour, to call out Christ in what seems even like a rebellion against Christ. This is actually a movement toward, and that's even what I, when I talk about atheistic theism, that's even what I mean, that there has to be this sacred loss of God in order to find God. And I think that's how it works, really. I mean, Feuerbach says that gods are projections of ourselves, idealized versions of us that we project out into the cosmos, and these are our gods. And so all gods, you never have a God who's a pizza delivery man, because that's nobody's dream for their life. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's no one's dream for their life. So gods are always, they do very human things, but they do them like in this ultimate sense, And so like they're versions of ourselves. It's everything we wish we were, but clearly right now aren't. And we project them outward and they become our gods because we want someone to save us from where we are, right? And so this ultimate version of ourselves could save us. Eventually they become uncoupled from us, and we forget that we're projecting this. And these things that we project out as saviors become our tormentors, because now they loom over us in perfection and make us feel less than. And so I think that's a good description of what gods are. Jesus comes into the world to show us that God is exactly like us, not to show us that God is this ultimate version of us that we'll never become. But he comes and he is exactly what we are, and reveals to us that you can find God right here in the flesh of daily existence. And I think that's the big difference. That's all of our idols are ultimate versions of ourselves. And I think we think that if we can get to the bottom of the idol pile, we'll find the truth. And all these calcifications and idols that have built up around the truth just need to be shattered so we can find the essence and truth. But I think most of our idols, we're not going to find God in them, because it's us trying to find God up there and out there. God kind of enters in apocalyptically and shatters those illusions and says, no, I'm just like you. I'm not up there and out there. And so the shattering of the idols is a movement toward God. The breaking of these things is actually the atheism. I think the new atheist movement was a move of God. I think the revival that in the mid-90s, everyone was saying, there's a bigger one coming, there's another wave coming. I think the new atheist movement was that revival in part. And I think the present deconstruction movement is that as well. Of course, back in the 90s, we would have never recognized this as that. Heck no, man. No, we wouldn't. But like, I think it is. I think it is. And I think, and it looks like a movement away. It looks like a great falling away. But I'm like, no, the great falling away is what we're recovering from right now, I think. And so I think the church's job right now is to, even in those arenas where it looks like we're moving away, to say, no, we're moving towards. And yeah, maybe there's some things here and there, whatever. There's some dangers and there's some things to avoid, pitfalls. But ultimately, I think history is moving toward God. And I think that's always been the case. I think that's how it's always been going. And I think post-Christianity is exactly what we need.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do.
No, I agree. I think there's a tendency for us to calcify things, so to solidify things. So we go, okay, so that's God. Well, let's build the statue, and then let's look at that. And then when we go that way or we go this way, we can always just look back and go, oh, that's God. That's where we are. And it just puts these. It solidifies us where we are. Now, where we are is wonderful. How amazing we have come to where we are. That's brilliant. But to make a God in the image of where we are right now means we cannot have a God of where we need to go. And I think you've captured that beautifully there. And I think that I often have heard people said to me, I've been praying for revival for decades, and I didn't expect for this to be what, if I'd known that this was what I was praying for, I wouldn't have prayed for it, right? Yeah. You wouldn't, if someone had told 17-year-old you, oh, when you're pacing around the pool table, what you're praying for is for people to lose their faith so they can know God. You'd be like, wait, what? What do you mean that? That sounds heretical, But in a sense, it's exactly what this movement is. It's amazing, and it's exciting because it feels like we have these major revivals throughout history, but all they do is they tear down one idol and set up a new one, or tear down a statue and set up a new one, or whatever language for iconic language we have of, like, this is God and this is what it is, and this is Christianity. Christianity is that we have a few slaves, but maybe we should be nice to them. That's Christianity. And then we move forward, and we're all starting to go, it does feel uncomfortable though. We really shouldn't, but that's what the statue says, is we should just be good to the slaves. I'm glad that occasionally we go, let's tear down that statue, let's build a new statue up here from where we've got to. I guess what's interesting to me is, as we look at the different statues we've built, if we look at these revival moments throughout history, you can see them constantly every few hundred years. There's a famous principle that every sort of 500 years there's these major shifts. We can look at maybe the Reformation as a major kind of shift in Christianity, and we bring ourselves to now 500 years later, and we had the printing press then, now we've got the internet, and I think that's no coincidence of why these things spark.
Absolutely.
But it feels like there's what's happening right now is not, it feels like there's less of an interest to build a statue. And I think that's what's exciting to me is it feels like, now, I don't know if we can avoid this. I don't know if this is just a part of human nature, is how we engage with the unknown, the ineffable, that which is beyond words, anything we can see, say, describe, taste. Do we always create a bit of a statue? But it feels like this movement, it's bucking against that to some degree. It's saying, no, I don't want to set in stone something, but actually I'd rather create a new thing that is, it delights in moving forward it's not that we finally figured it out. I guess that's the earmark of all these revivals, is the big tagline for the revival could be, we finally figured it out. God finally came to us and we now got it. It's all about praying for people this way. It's all about people repenting. It's all about people getting healed. It's all about, and now it feels like maybe if it's all about, we don't know. And maybe we should have some more humility and walk forward in a bit more grace. Will we look back at that and go, oh, we were so young, we were so, whatever, immature as a society or not? I don't know. But it does feel significantly different. Do you agree with that? Or do you think there is a tendency of us, or a potentiality of us repeating the same mistake? Is there a possibility that we're not that different, that we aren't actually stepping into something that radically different, but we're just reframing the same story in a new way? What do you think about this? Do you think, I don't know. I'm trying to think what the right question is here, but I do think, I guess I'm concerned that every time there's these big moves of God, everyone's like, we got it. And that's how it feels, in a sense. Not that I've got it, but actually I feel like the only thing I can say I've got it in is that I don't have it, and I can't see that changing, and that's exciting to me. But do you think there's potential that that's not the case? Maybe we are falling into the same pitfalls, or do you think there's things we can do to avoid that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we could fall into that same pitfall. Exactly what it would look like, I can't say precisely right now, but as you said, every past move of God or revival, whatever you want to call it, you do end up with nothing but an idol at the end, typically. Some changed lives, of course. Maybe the church has been moved forward a little bit, but you're left with the statue. Like Azusa Street, the Assemblies of God came out of Azusa Street. And what did we get? 16 fundamental truths. I was an Assemblies of God minister. For years. Every year, and this is nothing against the AG, they were good to me, and I enjoyed my time within that denomination. But every year you have to sign a piece of paper that's saying you agree with 2 key doctrines. There's 16 fundamental truths within the Assemblies of God, but there's only 2 that you have to every year say you still believe. One is a pre-tribulation rapture, and the other is that speaking in tongues is the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Why? Because that's the legacy of Azusa Street. It was pre-tribulation rapture. This is the move of God preceding the rapture, and the truth that came out of it, the belief that came out of it was that speaking in tongues is the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Spirit. So there is still, this was several years ago, maybe they've changed it, but I don't think so. But that idol was still very...
My dad's an AOG. He's ordained in AOG, so he still has to...
But that was the legacy of it. That comes out. That idol is still there. You have to, 100 years later, do you still hold on to this? Do you still agree with this? So like the move of God, it solidified. It didn't open a space where we can be open to flux and change and mystery. It followed the cloud, as it were. It's like, no, gather around the statue, don't follow the cloud, And I think that's a way of trying to protect and preserve the experience we had. And I think individually, that's why people get hooked to certain denominations and belief systems, because let's say they were an alcoholic and then they had a radical experience at a Pentecostal church. Well, until the day they died, they're going to try to say this is the truth. Why? Because they're trying to validate and hold on to the experience, because wherever I had the experience, it has to be real because I had this experience there. And so it's like we're kind of all liquid, and then we have an experience and we become a solid. But I think the key is to try to become a vapor, where we can embrace a whole new way of being, where there can be a little bit more transience and movability, and not just either being liquid or solid. I think we can exist in different states. And the thing about what's going on right now is that I think it has built into it a mechanism to try to keep us from building an idol, and that's the hope I have. Whether or not it's going to work out that way, I don't know. I mean, humans are master idol builders, and we can, if there's something going on, we can find a way to build an idol out of it. So my hope is that that internal check and mechanism will keep us from doing that. But of course, who can really say? And I think if we err in any, if there's a place where the present kind of deconstruction movement might err, and what could ultimately lead to its demise and maybe a return to fundamentalism, is an abandonment of all structure, or an abandonment of anything being certain. Because I think the human needs certainty. If you put a kid in an area where there's no borders whatsoever, they're going to feel very unsafe. So they do need to know that there are borders, but you can be in a state park with borders. There can be a lot to explore, and it still be there's borders. And that's what I think Christ is. I think God looks like this. Well, that's beautiful. And once you get inside, that might sound confining or limiting, but it's liberating, because once you get inside of that thing that sounds like a small confining principle, it's huge, and you'll never find the end of this. But at the same time, there is safety, and there are borders, and there is certainty, just in that God looks like this. But within the reality of God looks like this, you're not cramped at all. There's all sorts of things to explore, and you'll never find the end of it. And I think, maybe if deconstruction ever, if there's a weak spot, it would maybe just be, eliminating the concept that there's anything solid or anything certain, and just everything's liquid and gelatinous, and you'll never find any sacred solidity in life. Well, I don't believe that. I do think there is the non-deconstructible. And if you deconstruct long enough, you hit that, And so I think if there would be a place where we could err, it would only be that, and just saying that ultimately everything is deconstructible and can be taken apart. But if we're coming at it from a Christian perspective, and not all are, but I am. So from my perspective, there is going to be one thing that is non-deconstructible, and that is God. I think Derrida said it was justice, but that's also God, Yeah. And so I think that is something we have to bear in mind as well, is that there does have to be, if you take all solidity and all certainty away, you will probably have a return to fundamentalism, and it might be like a return to a rabid form of fundamentalism, because everything was so liquid and gelatinous that then everyone's going to want like rock hard, solid certainty. Yep. So that's my thought on that anyways, and time will tell. But
I think that's very, very astute. I think you're capturing some of the fears that bounce around in my head of going, I feel like there's a lot of tendency that we could fall into old habits here. We might think it's completely different. It's like,
it's an idol all the same, right? Yep.
Exactly. Well, you're talking earlier about, we all think we want the best for our kids and blah, blah. And even like the very progressive kids, like they can be whatever they want. Well, if you let a progressive parent go, they can be whatever they want. And then the kid goes, I'm really conservative and I'm like really right wing and I'm really whatever the progressive would hate. Very quickly realize, oh no, I still have my idea and I'm very upset about it not being that way. And so I think, absolutely, these tendencies are there. Jeff, we're running out of time, but we should have you back on at some point and we could talk about.
I'd love to, man.
110 different things. I mean, honestly, I had a list of about 30 different topics that we could talk about, and I don't think I spoke about one of them. I was just like, this is just great. Where we're going, letting be what is, and loving what is. That's what it's about, right? For people that aren't familiar with you, to be honest with you, a lot of my audience should be. I recommend your stuff a lot. I kind of point them towards your books and stuff like that. But can you let them know? I mean, there's your book, Atheistic Theist. Fantastic. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for sure. How do people follow you, track with you? You're putting out a lot of great stuff as far as thoughts and material. Like, what's the best way for them to engage with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a website. It is presently under construction. So if you go there, you're not going to find anything right now. And I apologize for that. But for future reference, it is jeff-turner.com. jeff-turner.com. Probably the best way to connect with me is on social media. I do much more on Facebook than I do any other platform right now. And that's probably just because I'm getting old. But
I was going to say, man, you're showing your age.
I know.
You're not preaching the gospel on TikTok, man.
That's my next one. I'm going to come up with some great dances and things and change the world. But I'm trying to be more active on Instagram and things like that.
Instagram is where I'm at, man. I love it.
Yeah. But if you connect with, no, I know you're very good on that. I admire that. I'm trying to.
It makes me sad though because I don't see your stuff as much because I can't Facebook drives me insane. But I miss out on people that are just there. So I'm an evangelist. I'm drawing you in.
Exactly.
But I know a lot of people are on Facebook. So
So if you do connect with me there, though, you can get if you just look up Jeff Turner, I'm usually the first one that pops up.
I'll put the link in the show notes for people that are watching or seeing as well. You can find it below or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Also, I have a couple books out. If you hopped on Amazon, I just happen to have a copy of them laying in front of me.
Oh, here we go. Visual demonstration.
The Atheistic Theist. This is my newest book. It's a lot of what we were talking about today and then some. But it's actually on sale for $2.99 on Kindle right now.
Nice.
And then I have Saints in the Arms of a Happy God, which is my first book that I wrote.
Yes.
It's about 400 some plus pages just of theology and kind of taking apart some of the evangelical myths that I grew up struggling with. But both of those are available. If you you can check me out on YouTube. Oh man. Look up Jeff Turner. See, I'm so bad at social media these days. I don't even remember what my I'll send you a link and maybe we can put it in the notes.
In the show notes.
There we go.
I'll be following them on YouTube and things like that, so I can find them quite easily.
I used to be obsessed with all this stuff and on it all, and life has gotten busy the last couple of years, so I'm not as on top of things as I used to be. But if you connect with me on Facebook, you can connect with me in every other way if you connect with me there. And I'm pretty active on there as well. So, but if you grab one of the books, it helps us keep doing what we're doing and writing and staying on the road traveling. And because we probably won't be on the road traveling and speaking
for
a while, things like that really do help us to keep going. So, if someone wanted to grab it, that would be a blessing to my family. So,
and do you have a Patreon or something for people to support you?
I do actually. Patreon.com/religionless. I regularly upload new messages and things to there. And yeah, that's a fantastic help as well. Actually, I'm getting ready to launch a podcast. Actually, Phil and we were supposed to record an episode for my podcast today as well, but my time is a bit more limited today than I was hoping for it to be. But the name of the podcast is just going to be called Religionless. And I've got some great interviews set up, and I'm really excited about launching it. And I'm using this quarantine season to try to get all of that done and organized and ready to go. So
dude, everyone's stuck in their home. Yeah. It's perfect, right?
I know.
You're trying to arrange with people and they're like, well, yeah, I guess I'm just sitting at home. I could do something.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
So many things that I would have never had the time to do. I'm finally getting the chance to do. I told my wife, it's like the scene in all the X-Men movies where, who's it Quicksilver, right? The guy who's super fast, I believe. Well, there's versions of this in all kinds of movies, but where he just starts to move at hyper speed and everything else seems to slow down.
Slow.
You're in this impossible situation where there's no way you're going to get out of it. But now it's slowed down to the point where you can just go and make these little tiny tweaks. And then when everything returns to normal, you'll be left with a completely different scenario. And that's kind of what I'm using this to do. All these things that I've been meaning to do for years, but haven't had the time to do, just making these little tweaks and alterations. And hopefully when the world returns, I'll have something else on my hands.
Place. Nice.
That's what I'm hoping for, man. But we'll see. What is that me trying to manipulate? I don't know.
Who knows? So I've got to ask as well. So you said your latest book, Atheistic Theist. That's not a new book, right? When did you write that?
It's actually not.
A while back.
Oddly enough, I can't even believe it's been this long, but it actually came out in November of 2016. So it's coming up on 4 years.
Oh yeah,
4 years ago.
3, 4, yeah.
Which I really can't believe it's that old, but
you've got to be writing something else right
now.
Yes,
I am. Okay. I'm writing several things. But the sequel to this book is called A Sacred Yes, and that comes from the Nietzschean parable of the camel, lion, and child. So it's kind of a sequel to this. Like the Atheistic Theist was kind of about the power of no. It was kind of about what we say no to, and this is more about what we say yes to. And it's called A Sacred Yes: Christianity for the Deconstructed. So I'm working on that, and I'm hoping to have that finished, not finished to where it can be purchased, written by June.
Nice. Okay.
And then
probably seeing it by the end of the year at least. Yeah.
That is the hope. Yeah. So I'm hoping by fall, everything will be edited and ready to go. Yeah. I'm also working on a novel right now. And this is the thing I'm working the hardest on. And I'm really, really excited about it. And also I've never done anything like this before. So it's kind of a new adventure, but the working title is just 12 right now. And it's actually a theological, philosophical horror story. And I'm writing it in the style of like a ghost story, horror story. And it's actually about the experience of deconstruction and rediscovering who one is in the aftermath of that. And it's going to be really, more of an allegory. It's not going to be real heavy with Jesus showing up and stuff like that. But I'm really trying to encapsulate the journey I've been on for the last decade, but in this format. And I don't know when that'll be done. I'm going to give myself some room with that just because I've never written a novel before. So I'm going to say hopefully within
dynamic, right?
Oh man, it is
a completely different type of writing. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. So, but yeah, the next book I'm hoping to be out by fall. And then that one, I'm going to say probably about maybe a year just to give myself some space to work on it. But,
awesome. Yeah. Nice, dude. I can't wait, but I can't wait till we get to chat again. I mean, I'm looking forward to being on your podcast. We'll definitely have you back on this. I'm planning on bashing out 2 every week now. I'm loving doing these and just chatting to people. So I'm like, I just gonna keep doing it. So it'll be before long. I'm gonna run out of people and immediately be like, oh, who do I want to have back? You're gonna be one of the top of my list. Trust me.
I'd love to, man. I'd love
to. I feel there's just so much more wisdom to be pulled out of you for sure. And like I said, when I look at people that are putting out stuff online, when I'm reading stuff, I read the whole gamut. I see all of it and I love all of it as well. It's really fascinating. And I'm learning from people even that are radically fundamental at times and going, wow, there's something in this for me. If only helping me integrate my own self a little bit. But when I look at your stuff, you're one of the people I read and I go, oh, you're where I want to go. And the people that pull you forward, and there's people that are where I need to go that I don't recognize or I don't like or whatever. That's just part of the nature of it. But there's people that are just in those places where you're like, oh, that's drawing me in. It's drawing me in. People like Richard Rohr, people like yourself. I'm like, they see something and are approaching something in a way that I know I need to move into. And so I really appreciate what you're doing. Honestly, it's absolutely incredibly important work. And so
I appreciate that, man.
Really appreciate you coming on to do this as well. But
yeah. I appreciate you having me, man. I've had a good time. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Cool.
Yes.
Well, I hope you have a good day. Hope you get all the stuff you need to do.
Man.
Done. What is it that you do day in, day out? Do you have a job as well?
I do. I work a day job. I won't say where, just because people are weird and try to get a hold of me. I've had stuff like that before, but yeah, I do work a day job. My wife and I both do, just keep the SS Turner afloat. And in uncertain times like these, I'm grateful that we have it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Has it been affected by stuff with pandemic stuff, or are you able to work from home mostly and stuff?
Thankfully, we're both able to work from home, and we haven't really been affected. Thank God for that. I know a lot have. And so I kind of feel bad because for us, this has really just been a time to focus and get some things completed that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I kind of feel bad because as an introvert, I'm actually really enjoying the time, and it also, have to keep in mind that others are not having the same experience that I am. But thankfully for us, I'm very grateful we've been able to just maintain normal life. But
that's great. I'm really glad to hear.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, have a good day, man.
Thanks a lot, man.
Really great to finally see each other in person, and
absolutely, man.
To do it again. And just let me know when you're wanting to record, and we'll get something done for sure.
Will do, man. All right.
Love you, man.
Love you too. Peace.
Yeah.